Hello, my name is John Dede, Professor of Political Science at the Community Colleges of Baltimore County. Today, on my Maryland podcast and Substack page on the Maryland Government and Politics edition, I am talking today with candidate for Baltimore County State's Attorney Sarah David. Welcome back.
Thanks, John. Thanks so much for having me.
Glad to do it. My first question is, how is the campaign going?
So it's going really well. We just had a great endorsement from Governor Wes Moore last week, which is very exciting for us. We've been endorsed by a lot of elected officials here in Baltimore County, including the former Speaker, Adrian Jones, Senator Shelley Heddleman, and Senator Ben Brooks, and Delegate Cheryl Pastor, Delegate Kim Ross, Delegate Nick Allen, as well as the Teachers Union. So we've been doing well in that respect, and we have been knocking on doors, thousands of doors all over Baltimore County. So things are going well.
That's good to hear for your campaign. I have to ask this one question. The Moore endorsement for you is a really good one. How did that transpire? I mean, did he call you? Did you lobby him? I'm always curious how these things happen.
I think they happen, in part just because, we've had a lot of overlapping, communication as far as, people in the administration who've been supportive and other types of things. And, I think that it's just really wonderful for us to have that endorsement and to have the governor's support, especially running against a 20-year incumbent, it's a big deal for us.
Hmm. One of the big issues in this campaign that's come up the last few months is those three words, Towson Town Center.
Hmm.
When you think of what's going on there now with people leaving, I was recently reading where they said they only have 76% occupancy. I live near Marley Station, and they would kill for 50% occupancy right now. To give you an idea what's going on, and they have totally different issues. What can you as a state's attorney do to kind of maybe bring that back? Is there something you can do? Is it, from your perspective, is it a law enforcement issue, or what's going on and what can be done?
So the short answer is yes, there's something that you can do as state's attorney. And the unfortunate answer is that that's not what's happening in Baltimore County in our current administration. So, my vision for the state's attorney as an elected position is one that focuses on crime prevention, community engagement, and those types of solutions. And Towson is such a wonderful example. Of course, it's a space where we have to use a lot of different things to solve the problem, right? We have to make sure that we are redefining the space if that's what we need. We need to figure out what the problem is. We need data on exactly what's happening as far as crime. And then we need to have the tables together. And I think the state's attorney should be the leader in sort of facilitating those conversations and what we can do to make Towson safer and also to make people feel that Towson is safer. So there's a lot of conversations now with not a lot of information about what's actually happening in Towson. Certain, data is saying that there's actually not a crime, but, a lot of the news reporting makes people feel unsafe. And so we need to navigate that difference. And that's a really important space for the state's attorney to lead. And that hasn't been happening.
What is your overall crime prevention strategy for the community as for Baltimore County? Because, when a lot of people run, they pick certain little things, a little from item one, a little from item three. What is your overall strategy?
So overall, obviously, we have to focus on actually understanding what's happening in Baltimore County. The state's attorney's office doesn't publish any data, doesn't maintain data, doesn't make any of that information about what's happening in the office available to the public. So that's a really important initial piece in how we're actually going to solve and prevent crime. First of all, we need to get a handle on what's happening in different neighborhoods and what types of conversations we need to be having to prevent certain types of crime. The other challenge is, how we can get the community engaged in that crime prevention. So a little bit about my background, which I know we discussed before, but it's relevant to this piece. I worked for the New York City Police Department in their counterterrorism division when the counterterrorism division had started. And the idea was, I think a lot of people will remember, right? See something, say something. It was to engage sort of the public in what was a counterterrorism mission. And so the challenge is sort of making that a public safety mission here in Baltimore County. And one of the things we did at the NYPD is we hosted conferences. It was called NYPD Shield, and we would bring in members from the real estate community. We'd bring in members from the finance community. We'd bring in members from different community organizations. We'd bring in all different types of organizations and talk about what types of trends we were seeing, and then hear solutions and sort of brainstorm about what types of things we could do. I think that Baltimore County needs a lot more of that. When we talk about crime prevention, it's not something that one person can stand and dictate. It's something that sort of we all need to engage in together with real data so that we can come up with those solutions.
One of the issues on crime, and I've talked to your opponent, Mr. Schellenberg, I've talked to Ivan Bates on this too, and it is they are not happy campers when it comes to the juvenile justice bill that was put through the legislature kind of at the last hour, last session. What are your thoughts about that bill? If you're elected, how would you work with it? Do you think it needs tweaked, or what's your overall thoughts?
So there have been discussions about sort of adjusting how Maryland engages with automatic charging for probably at least a decade. And I think that the challenge is that Maryland hasn't sort of taken by the reins this juvenile justice issue and really sort of talked about our principles and where we need to go with our juvenile justice program. And I think that most people would agree that the juvenile justice system should be able to support most juvenile crimes, right? We always need to control for extremes, right? Always. But the juvenile system should support most juvenile crimes. And that's where sort of all of the other states have moved. But as other states have moved, Maryland has fallen further and further behind, putting us into the same category as basically only Alabama in sort of this automatic charging. And so I think that sort of, there is this legislative path. It's an important path. It's an important place for the state's attorney's office to have credibility and to engage, but it's not the only space that we need leadership. I think that what we really need is somebody who's going to talk about the different facets of this juvenile system that need to serve our community. Again, I will come back to the fact that Baltimore County, unlike Mr. Bates in Baltimore City, does not have data on what's happening in our juvenile crimes. And even more importantly, perhaps, data on what is effective in our juvenile programs. And the challenge with that is we are sending people to programs and they're not working and we don't know it. And so we are mishandling our resources. And I think Baltimore County really needs to step up to the plate. And this is what I have, with a vision to say, we need to talk about how to get our juvenile justice system into the place that we need it to be to keep Baltimore County safe. Because the number one thing I hear in Baltimore County when it comes to juvenile justice is X, Y, and Z happened to me and nothing happened. Nothing happened, nothing happened. Is that true? Is that not true? I wish that there was information to know that. But I think that where sort of the legislature's thought process is in the exact right place is that we do need to invest in our juvenile justice system. And I think, the most states' attorneys would agree with this too, to get to a place where they can support the needs of the juvenile justice system. And I think that really importantly, Governor Moore has appointed Secretary Tolentino. I had the opportunity to work with her 10 years ago, when she was working under the Hogan administration, under Secretary Abed. And she really understands the system well. And I think that she's going to be a fantastic partner going forward in having these conversations. And so I really think that there's going to be a lot of great future development if we have the right people at the table.
Yes, there has been a change in the juvenile justice program in the state of Maryland. Vincent Schiraldi is out, and it sounds like you have a lot of confidence in the new kid on the block, which is a good thing because if you put a new person in, Betsy Torrentino, you do that. I think a lot of times when a new person comes in, everyone's like optimism, glad the other person's gone. So, in your perspective, you feel that this is a good move, but you feel you have confidence in her.
Yeah, and I will note that, she's certainly new to the secretarial position, but not to the issue. Again, she's been involved in this agency for well over a decade and is known sort of to have a very, very sophisticated and intelligent approach to policy. And I think that that's really important when we talk about this issue, because this is an issue that, Maryland really has to work to get right. And we have to do that sort of more holistically. Obviously, the legislative process is a part of that, but we need to do that outside of the legislative process as well to make sure that we are tracking what is and isn't successful and that we're allocating resources to programs that actually work to ensure juvenile accountability when that's appropriate and, of course, rehabilitation as well.
I always like to ask candidates this question because I kind of like to have a fun question, but just of interest in general. Who would you consider your political North Stars? The people that you've admired in politics that you kind of would like to, at some form, be able to walk in their footsteps, people you look at, and you might have a couple biographies of them on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you mean historical or here in Baltimore County. But
Go either way you want with it.
Okay, well, yes, I am. I think that sort of when we look at the Lincoln sort of team of rivals and then Obama sort of adopting that as well, I think that that's a beautiful model. I think that, we only create progress by facilitating conversations with diverse voices. And that sort of, I'm not running for this position because I have all of the answers, right? I'm running for this position because I have the will to solve the problems. And I think that that model of sort of taking different perspectives and having them be part of the engagement in the solution is really important. And coming just sort of back, I guess, to Baltimore County, I have to acknowledge, women like Senator Shelley Hettleman and Delegate Cheryl Pastor, who I've watched, growing up when there haven't been a lot of women elected in Baltimore County. And they are women that not only, serve the community, engage in important issues like education, but also really work to build other women up and to support a system where women can survive in politics and thrive in politics. And so I think that, on the wider historical scale, but also in the present, there are some really good models of strong collaborative models for me to look up to.
Do you have any preference at all as far as who the next county executive is? Do you have an endorsement, or are you just kind of like seeing where that one plays out and you're not trying to get involved in it?
No, I'm not getting involved in that race. We have a lot to do in our own race. And also, I will work with whoever is elected county executive. I think that it's really important that the county executive and the state's attorney have a really strong working relationship because when we talk about making sure Baltimore County is less siloed, and when we talk about sharing data, and when we talk about crime prevention, making sure that those offices, even though they're independently elected, are working really closely together is important. And we're fortunate to have great people running for that office. It's not a race that I'm participating in, and hope to work with whoever's successful in that race when we're successful in ours.
I've talked to a couple people recently in Baltimore County, and I've experienced this just a little bit when I drive around here. It seems like recently, whether it's the Beltway, York Road, or any average suburban community, it has a little Indianapolis 500 to it. And I've noticed this more the last couple months where people are really flying. What can be done by the state's attorney's office in some form to deal with this problem of this aggressive driving that's going on that is basically it's making people better drivers because they're clutching the steering wheel out of fear for someone that's going to all of a sudden zip in front of them.
Yeah, and certainly in North County, northern Baltimore County, and around sort of those areas, that is the number one issue I hear about when I'm on the doors is sort of what are we going to do about this reckless driving? I think that, again, one of the challenges when I talk about the importance of modernizing the state's attorney's office, one of the issues is our state's attorney's office doesn't have a public affairs arm at all. They don't have a mechanism to, put out information to the public in an effective way, whether that's on social media, whether that's through the, actual communication with the press. And so I think that one of the challenges is we need to make sure that when we are prosecuting these cases, when they are severe aggressive driving, that we are publicizing that, right? There's a deterrence effect there. But we also have to have, preventative pieces. And that's where partnerships with law enforcement, as it relates to, what we're doing to prevent these issues. And also, as I said, when it came to New York, those posters were everywhere, see something, say something. We also need to put up, watch your speed and have a lot of sort of that public service deterrence that makes people aware that this is a challenge. So that's the type of leadership that we should see from the state's attorney's office and that we haven't been. But I think that it's important.
The last question I'm going to ask is related to basically futuristic in this sense. You get elected, you are sworn in, you walk into the office. What is kind of your not day one priority, but the first 2 to 3 months, what boxes have to be checked off that you look at right away and say, I got to get this stuff done just so I can start to get everything rolling?
Yeah, I think sort of the, initial 100 days, should be focused on making sure that we are increasing again our community engagement, making sure that we let people know who we are and that we're here for them, and including that in a more robust victim witness service to make sure that people understand, what our office is, what resources we offer, and that we are the place that they can come to, when they are through no fault of their own, right? At any day, at any hour, a victim or a witness of a crime. And then it's got to be the data. I think that in order to really create positive change in Baltimore County, we have to know what's actually happening in Baltimore County. The state's attorney's office, in order to be managed effectively, has to know whether it's losing cases and why it's losing cases, especially when it comes to violent crime. And so I think that we don't have that information now. And by not having that information, we're really missing an opportunity in deciding where to allocate resources. And so I think that first 100 days, those priorities are very doable, and they're certainly going to be first on my list.
There's one last thing I just thought of when you were talking about all this. Since 1991, I have pretty faithfully watched Law and Order episodes. How, on a scale of 1 to 10, meaning one, that ain't the real world, John, or 10, yeah, I've heard someone talk like that as far as in a prosecutor's office. How realistic is a show like that? Because, I mean, people get their assumptions about various things in life based on what they see on TV, how cops behave, how doctors behave, etc. And I think most of our knowledge and assumptions about what goes on in courtrooms is Judge Judy and Law and Order.
So I'll say this. I think that one of the biggest misnomers about Law and Order is how absolutely quickly they solve cases and they go to trial,
Yes.
right? I mean, that's I think where people are the most misled about what is a process that takes a very long time. And that's a really important reason that having victim witness services that can engage with victims and witnesses to manage those expectations is really, really important because it's not going to be solved, 30 minutes on the law enforcement side and then 30 minutes in the courtroom. There's going to be a lot of different things that are happening in between. As far as the dialogue, sure, sometimes things, obviously, I'm a political corruption prosecutor, things get very dramatic. But I think that fundamentally for the public, it is really important to understand how the office functions and what the office does. We have been knocking on doors in Baltimore County since probably June of last year, and the number one question we get asked is, what is the state's attorney? What is that? Do we have that? And that's something that we really need to solve if we're going to make Baltimore County safer, because it's a really important office for people to know about, and it can make a really big difference in our safety.
I want to thank you again for the time today. I enjoyed this a great deal, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome.